The Brown family has faced plenty of emotional turning points over the years on Sister Wives, but according to insiders close to the family, few moments created as much private conversation and emotional tension as the period surrounding Robyn Brown's baby reveal. At first, many family members reportedly expected the announcement to become a joyful moment that united everyone emotionally. A fresh start, a hopeful chapter, something positive for the family to focus on during a time when relationships inside the Brown household already felt increasingly complicated. But according to sources familiar with the situation, the emotional reactions behind the scenes turned out to be far more layered than anyone expected. Because while some family members genuinely felt excited for Robyn, others reportedly struggled privately with emotions they did not fully know how to express openly. And according to insiders, that emotional divide quickly became impossible ignoring. One source reportedly explained, "The announcement didn't just bring happiness, it brought up old emotional wounds people had been trying not to think about." At the center of those emotions was reportedly the changing dynamic involving Kody Brown and the rest of the family. Because according to insiders, by the time Robyn's reveal happened, several relationships inside the Brown family already felt emotionally fragile. Communication issues had quietly grown, feelings of favoritism reportedly lingered, and some family members allegedly felt emotionally disconnected long before the announcement itself happened. Now, however, sources say the pregnancy reveal intensified those feelings dramatically, especially for some of the older children. According to insiders, several adult children reportedly reacted to the news with mixed emotions privately, not because they disliked Robyn personally, but because the growing emotional imbalance inside the family had already become difficult for them emotionally. One insider reportedly explained, "The baby became symbolic of much bigger emotional issues already happening. That symbolism reportedly affected multiple relationships behind the scenes, because while Kody appeared publicly thrilled and emotionally invested in the announcement, some family members allegedly interpreted his excitement through a completely different emotional lens. To them, insiders say, the moment highlighted how emotionally present Kody appeared in certain relationships compared to others, and according to sources, that emotional comparison created tension almost immediately." Meanwhile, Kody Brown reportedly struggled emotionally during this period more than many viewers initially realized. According to insiders, Kody already felt emotionally lonely inside the plural family structure long before Robyn's reveal became public. But sources claim the announcement intensified feelings she had quietly tried suppressing for years. One insider explained, "Kody reportedly started questioning whether emotional equality inside the family truly existed anymore. That emotional doubt reportedly became difficult for her to ignore after watching how much attention and emotional energy surrounded Robyn's pregnancy." According to people close to the family, Kody did not necessarily resent the baby itself. Instead, insiders say she struggled emotionally with what the situation seemed to represent about shifting priorities inside the Brown family overall. Meanwhile, Janelle Brown reportedly approached the situation somewhat differently emotionally. Sources claim Janelle tried remaining practical and emotionally balanced publicly, while also recognizing the tension quietly building underneath the surface. According to insiders, Janelle understood that pregnancy announcements inside plural marriage often affect far more than one relationship emotionally, because every new development can unintentionally reshape emotional dynamics across the entire family. One insider reportedly explained, "In plural marriage, major life events don't happen in isolation emotionally," and according to sources, that reality became increasingly obvious after Robyn's reveal, especially because several family members allegedly began comparing how emotional support, attention, and involvement seemed distributed throughout the family during this period. Meanwhile, fans of Sister Wives also began noticing changes publicly. Many viewers commented online about how emotionally enthusiastic Kody appeared regarding Robyn's pregnancy, compared to certain earlier family moments involving other wives. Some fans defended Kody completely, arguing every pregnancy naturally brings different emotions depending on life circumstances. Others, however, believe the reveal unintentionally exposed deeper emotional imbalances already growing inside the family. And according to insiders, the online reaction reportedly mirrored many private conversations happening behind the scenes at the same time. One source explained, "People inside the family were noticing the same emotional differences viewers were noticing." That reportedly made the situation even more emotionally complicated, because once emotional favoritism becomes something openly discussed, even indirectly, it can fundamentally change how people interpret future interactions. And according to insiders, several relationships inside the Brown family reportedly began shifting emotionally after that point. Meanwhile, Meri Brown reportedly experienced particularly complicated emotions surrounding the reveal. According to sources close to the family, Meri's fertility struggles already carried deep emotional pain privately for many years, and insiders claim Robyn's pregnancy announcement unintentionally reopened some of those emotional wounds. Not because Meri wanted unhappiness for Robyn, but because pregnancy and motherhood reportedly remained emotionally sensitive subjects for her personally. One insider explained, "People sometimes forget that happy family moments can still trigger grief emotionally for someone else."
That emotional complexity reportedly became very real during this period inside the family, especially because plural marriage often forces people to process private emotional pain while publicly supporting major life events happening around them simultaneously. And according to insiders, that balancing act can become emotionally exhausting over time. Meanwhile, Robyn herself reported some of the emotional tension developing after the reveal. According to sources, she initially hoped the pregnancy might help emotionally reconnect parts of the family during a difficult period. Instead, insiders say the situation sometimes appeared to magnify emotional fractures already quietly growing underneath the surface. One source reportedly explained, Robyn wanted the announcement to bring happiness, but the family was already carrying too much unresolved emotion. That emotional reality reported to be more obvious as conversations continued privately behind the scenes, especially because the pregnancy arrived during a period when several family relationships already felt emotionally strained, uncertain, or disconnected. And according to insiders, major emotional events often intensify whatever emotional foundation already exists underneath them. If relationships feel strong, big moments can create closeness. If relationships already feel fragile, those same moments can unintentionally expose unresolved pain. That reportedly became the emotional challenge surrounding Robyn's reveal. Meanwhile, Kody allegedly struggled understanding why some reactions inside the family seemed emotionally distant or complicated. According to insiders, he reportedly viewed the pregnancy primarily as joyful family news and expected excitement from everyone. But sources claim several family members emotionally processed the announcement through much deeper layers connected to years of shifting family dynamics. One insider explained, Kody saw a baby announcement. Other people saw years of emotional imbalance attached to it. And according to sources close to the family, that emotional disconnect may have become one of the most important underlying issues surrounding the entire situation. Because the reveal itself was never only about the baby. It became about emotional attention, emotional security, family priorities, favoritism, emotional exhaustion, and growing feelings of disconnection inside the Brown family. And according to insiders, once those emotions surfaced privately, the emotional dynamics surrounding Robyn's pregnancy changed permanently. Not through one explosive confrontation, but through a series of emotional realizations that many relatives reportedly could no longer ignore afterward.
As the months surrounding Robyn Brown's pregnancy continued unfolding, insiders say emotional tension inside the Brown family reached levels many relatives had never fully experienced before. Because, according to people close to the family, the situation was no longer only about one announcement or one new baby. It had become about emotional trust. And, according to insiders, trust inside several relationships was already beginning to crack long before viewers fully realized it publicly on Sister Wives. One insider reportedly explained, the pregnancy didn't create all the emotional problems. It exposed problems that had already been growing quietly for years. That emotional exposure reportedly changed how many family members viewed the entire family structure moving forward, especially regarding Kody Brown and his emotional role inside the family. According to insiders, several relatives increasingly felt emotional relationships inside the Brown family no longer operated equally. Some family members allegedly believed one household had become emotionally prioritized above the others. And sources claim Robyn's pregnancy intensified those feelings because of how much emotional energy, time, and focus surrounded her during that chapter of family life. Meanwhile, Kody Brown reportedly reached a major emotional turning point privately during this period. According to insiders, Kody had spent years trying to emotionally adapt herself around disappointment and emotional imbalance inside plural marriage. But sources claim something about watching the family dynamic during Robyn's pregnancy made it increasingly difficult for her to continue emotionally accepting the situation as normal. One insider reportedly explained, Kody reportedly started realizing she was emotionally exhausted from constantly trying to be okay with feeling secondary. That realization reportedly affected her deeply, because, according to insiders, Kody had spent much of her adult life believing emotional sacrifice was necessary to keep plural marriage functioning. Now, however, sources claim she increasingly questioned whether emotional sacrifice had slowly become emotional self-erasure instead. That emotional shift reportedly became one of the earliest major signs that her long-term relationship with Kody was approaching a breaking point. Meanwhile, fans watching Sister Wives continued debating the emotional dynamics publicly online. Many viewers openly discussed whether Kody's behavior during Robyn's pregnancy reflected deeper favoritism inside the family. Some fans defended him strongly, arguing emotional relationships naturally evolve differently over time. Others believed the contrast between households had become impossible ignoring.
And according to insiders, those public conversations mirrored private concerns already circulating inside the family itself. One source explained, the audience wasn't imagining the emotional shift. Family members were feeling it too. That reportedly created additional emotional pressure for everyone involved. Because once people begin noticing emotional imbalance openly, insiders say relationships often become even more emotionally sensitive afterward. Every interaction starts carrying symbolic meaning. Who receives attention? Who gets emotional support? Who appears prioritized? And according to insiders, Robyn's pregnancy became emotionally connected to all of those questions simultaneously. Meanwhile, Janelle Brown reportedly tried focusing on practicality and emotional stability during the growing tension. According to sources, Janelle understood that major emotional events inside plural marriage often create ripple effects far beyond the immediate situation itself. One insider reportedly explained, in plural families, emotional imbalance affects everyone eventually, even if nobody talks about it directly at first. That reportedly became increasingly obvious during this chapter of the family story. Because, according to insiders, several adult children allegedly started reevaluating their own emotional relationships with Kody more seriously during this period. Some reportedly questioned whether emotional closeness inside the family now depended largely on proximity to Robyn's household. Others allegedly struggled with feelings of emotional abandonment or inconsistency connected to earlier experiences growing up inside the plural family structure. And according to sources, those conversations quietly intensified as the pregnancy progressed. Meanwhile, Meri Brown reportedly continued facing emotionally difficult moments privately. According to insiders, Meri genuinely tried celebrating the pregnancy while simultaneously carrying unresolved grief connected to infertility, emotional distance in her marriage, and increasing isolation within the family. One source explained, Meri reportedly felt emotionally trapped between wanting to support the family and processing her own pain. That emotional conflict reportedly became exhausting for her over time, because, according to insiders, she often felt pressure maintaining emotional positivity outwardly while privately struggling with sadness and loneliness herself. Meanwhile, Robyn reportedly became increasingly aware that the pregnancy was emotionally affecting the family in ways she had not expected. According to insiders, she originally hoped the baby announcement might create emotional closeness and excitement during a period when family relationships already felt strained. Instead, sources claim the reveal unintentionally highlighted emotional fractures many relatives had spent years avoiding openly. One insider reportedly explained, Robyn reportedly realized the pregnancy had become emotionally symbolic of much bigger family issues. That reportedly weighed heavily on her emotionally too. Because, according to insiders, Robyn often felt caught between happiness about the baby and guilt about how emotionally complicated the family dynamic had become surrounding it. Still, sources say she also recognized why some relatives emotionally connected the pregnancy to broader concerns about favoritism and shifting family priorities. Especially because Kody reportedly spent increasing amounts of emotional energy focused around her household during this period. Meanwhile, Kody himself allegedly struggled understanding the full emotional depth of what was happening around him. According to insiders, he reportedly viewed the pregnancy primarily through excitement, pride, and hope for the future. But sources claim many other family members interpreted the situation through years of accumulated emotional experiences instead. One insider explained, Kody focused on celebrating the future. Other people were emotionally confronting the past. That disconnect reportedly became one of the defining emotional problems surrounding the entire situation. Because, according to insiders, the pregnancy reveal forced many relatives to finally acknowledge emotional patterns they had quietly noticed for years. Patterns involving unequal emotional attention, inconsistent communication, household favoritism, emotional neglect, and growing disconnection inside the family. And according to sources, once those patterns became impossible to ignore emotionally, the Brown family dynamic reportedly began changing in ways that would eventually reshape nearly every relationship moving forward. Especially because several adult children allegedly started questioning whether the family still functioned as one emotionally connected unit at all anymore. One insider reportedly explained, the pregnancy became the moment some people emotionally realized the family had already started separating long before anyone admitted it publicly. And according to sources close to the Browns, that emotional realization changed everything afterward.
As the excitement surrounding Robyn Brown's baby reveal continued spreading publicly, insiders say the emotional atmosphere inside the Brown family became increasingly complicated behind the scenes. Because while cameras captured smiles, celebrations, and hopeful conversations on sister wives, sources close to the family claim many relatives were privately struggling with emotions they felt uncomfortable expressing openly, especially the older children. According to insiders, several adult family members reportedly viewed the pregnancy announcement through an entirely different emotional lens than younger children or viewers watching from the outside. One insider reportedly explained, "The adults understood the emotional history attached to everything happening inside the family at that point. And according to sources, that history made the reveal feel emotionally heavier than a normal family announcement. Because by then, insiders say, many relationships inside the Brown family already felt strained in ways people rarely discuss directly. Communication problems reportedly existed quietly for years. Some relatives allegedly felt emotionally overlooked. Others reportedly struggled with growing feelings that emotional attention inside the family had become increasingly uneven. Now, however, Robyn's pregnancy reportedly intensified all of those emotions at once, especially regarding Kody Brown. According to insiders, several family members began paying closer attention to how emotionally involved Kody appeared during the pregnancy compared to other family situations in previous years. The excitement, the attention, the emotional investment. And according to sources, some relatives quietly interpreted those differences as confirmation of emotional favoritism they had already suspected for a long time. One insider explained, "It wasn't necessarily about the baby itself. It was about what the reaction seemed to reveal emotionally." That distinction reportedly became very important privately, because according to people close to the family, many relatives genuinely wanted happiness for Robyn and the baby. At the same time, however, insiders say the situation unintentionally highlighted emotional wounds connected to years of complicated family dynamics. Meanwhile, Kody Brown reportedly struggled increasingly with feelings she had tried suppressing for a very long time. According to insiders, Kody already felt emotionally disconnected from Kody before the pregnancy announcement happened, but sources claim watching the emotional energy surrounding Robyn's pregnancy intensified her awareness of how emotionally distant her own relationship had become. One source reportedly explained, "Kody started realizing how painful emotional comparison inside plural marriage had become for her. That realization reportedly affected her deeply, because according to insiders, plural marriage often requires wives to emotionally manage comparison constantly. Who receives more time, who receives more attention, who appears emotionally prioritized. And insiders claim those emotional comparisons became especially difficult for Kody during this chapter of the family story. Meanwhile, fans watching Sister Wives also began debating the emotional dynamic publicly online. Many viewers commented that Kody appeared especially energized and emotionally present around Robyn's pregnancy in ways they had not seen consistently with the other wives during recent years. Some fans argued the reaction made perfect sense because every pregnancy experience feels emotionally unique. Others believe the situation unintentionally exposed deeper relationship imbalances inside the family. And according to insiders, those public conversations reflected tensions already quietly happening within the Brown family itself. One source explained, "The audience started noticing emotionally what some family members had already been feeling privately. That reportedly made everything even harder emotionally, because once people begin publicly discussing emotional favoritism, insiders say it becomes almost impossible for family members not to notice the same patterns themselves." Meanwhile, Meri Brown reportedly experienced particularly emotional moments during this period. According to sources close to the family, Meri genuinely tried supporting Robyn while privately processing her own emotional pain connected to fertility struggles and changing family dynamics. One insider reportedly explained, "Meri could feel happy for Robyn and still grieve emotionally for herself at the same time. That emotional complexity reportedly became exhausting for her, because according to insiders, plural marriage sometimes forces family members to emotionally celebrate situations that also trigger deep personal sadness privately. And sources claim Meri increasingly struggled balancing those emotions during Robyn's pregnancy journey, especially because insiders say her relationship with Kody already felt emotionally fragile by then. Meanwhile, Janelle Brown reportedly remained focused on trying to keep the broader family emotionally stable throughout the situation. According to insiders, Janelle understood better than most how major family events can unintentionally shift emotional dynamics across the entire plural family structure. One source explained, "In a family that large, emotional energy affects everyone, even when people don't openly discuss it." And according to insiders, emotional energy inside the family reportedly became increasingly tense after the pregnancy reveal, not because anyone openly rejected the baby, but because the announcement quietly magnified unresolved feelings already sitting underneath many relationships. Feelings involving emotional neglect, unequal attention, family favoritism, relationship insecurity, and emotional exhaustion. Meanwhile, Robyn herself reportedly became increasingly aware that not everyone inside the family seemed emotionally comfortable after the announcement. According to sources, she initially believed the pregnancy might create emotional closeness during a period when the family badly needed positive momentum. Instead, insiders claim she gradually sensed emotional distance growing in certain relationships. One insider reportedly explained, "Robyn started realizing some family members connected the pregnancy to larger emotional frustrations they already carried. That realization reportedly affected her emotionally too, because according to insiders, Robyn did not necessarily want the pregnancy becoming symbolic of division or imbalance inside the family. However, sources say symbolism inside plural marriage often develops whether people intend it or not, especially when emotional relationships already feel unstable underneath the surface. Meanwhile, Kody reportedly struggled understanding why some family members appeared emotionally restrained instead of openly excited.
According to insiders, he primarily viewed the pregnancy as joyful family news, but sources claim several relatives emotionally interpreted the situation through years of accumulated emotional experiences instead. One insider explained, Kody focused on the baby, other people focused on what the reactions revealed about the family. That emotional disconnect reportedly became increasingly important, because according to insiders, many family tensions inside the Browns were no longer only about specific events anymore. They were about patterns of attention, patterns of emotional closeness, patterns of prioritization. And according to sources, Robyn's pregnancy became one of the moments that forced many family members to confront those emotional patterns more honestly than ever before, especially because the reveal happened during a period when emotional trust inside several relationships already felt fragile. Meanwhile, some adult children reportedly began having private conversations questioning whether the family dynamic itself had fundamentally changed. According to insiders, several relatives increasingly felt the family no longer operated with the emotional balance it once tried maintaining publicly. And sources claim those conversations quietly intensified after the pregnancy announcement. Not because anyone blamed the baby itself, but because the reveal reportedly became emotionally connected to broader fears about where the family was heading overall. One insider explained, the pregnancy became less about one child and more about what kind of family everyone felt they were living inside emotionally. And according to sources close to the Browns, that emotional realization changed multiple relationships permanently moving forward.
As the emotional fallout surrounding Robyn pregnancy continued affecting the Brown family, insiders say one difficult reality slowly became impossible for many relatives to ignore anymore. The family no longer emotionally functioned the way it once had. And according to people close to the Browns, that realization changed nearly every relationship moving forward after the baby reveal period shown around sister wives. Because while the pregnancy itself remained joyful for Robyn and Kody Brown personally, insiders claim it also became emotionally symbolic of a much larger transformation happening inside the family structure overall. One insider reportedly explained, the baby announcement forced people to emotionally confront truths they had been avoiding for years. Those truths reportedly involved emotional favoritism, fractured communication, unequal attention, relationship exhaustion, and growing emotional distance between households. And according to insiders, once those feelings surfaced openly, even privately, it became very difficult for relationships to return to how they previously functioned emotionally, especially for Kody Brown. According to sources close to the family, Kody reportedly experienced one of the deepest emotional shifts during this chapter of family life. For years, insiders say, she tried convincing herself that emotional sacrifice and disappointment were simply normal parts of plural marriage. If she felt lonely, she adapted. If she felt emotionally unsupported, she worked harder emotionally. If relationships became painful, she focused on maintaining family unity rather than questioning whether her own emotional needs were being ignored. But according to insiders, Robyn's pregnancy reportedly intensified feelings Kody had quietly suppressed for a very long time. One insider explained, Kody reportedly realized she could no longer emotionally survive by pretending everything felt balanced. That realization reportedly became one of the earliest emotional turning points leading toward her eventual separation from Kody. Because according to sources, the pregnancy period forced Kody to emotionally confront how disconnected and emotionally unfulfilled she already felt inside the marriage, long before viewers fully understood it publicly. Meanwhile, several adult children reportedly experienced major emotional realizations of their own during this time. According to insiders, some family members increasingly questioned whether the Brown family still operated with shared emotional priorities across all households equally. One source reportedly explained, some of the older kids started feeling like the family had emotionally split into separate worlds. That emotional division reportedly became more visible as relationships between households continued changing over time. Because according to insiders, emotional closeness inside the family increasingly revolved around specific relationships instead of the broader family unit collectively. And sources claim Robyn's pregnancy became one of the moments that made those shifts emotionally undeniable for many relatives. Meanwhile, Janelle Brown reportedly continued trying to maintain emotional stability amid the growing tension. According to insiders, Janelle often approached family problems practically rather than emotionally explosively. However, sources claim even she recognized that something fundamental inside the family dynamic had changed during this chapter. One insider explained, Janelle reportedly understood that once emotional trust weakens inside a plural family, everything becomes harder to hold together.
That emotional weakening reportedly affected nearly every relationship moving forward, especially because insiders say many relatives no longer felt emotionally confident that everyone inside the family received equal emotional investment anymore. Meanwhile, Meri Brown reportedly struggled with increasing feelings of emotional isolation during the same period. According to sources, Meri already felt emotionally disconnected from Kody long before the pregnancy reveal, but insiders claim the emotional focus surrounding Robyn's household intensified feelings of loneliness and emotional grief she had quietly carried for years. One source reportedly explained, Meri reportedly started realizing how emotionally alone she already felt inside the family. That realization reportedly became deeply painful privately, because according to insiders, plural marriage can become especially emotionally difficult when one relationship appears emotionally thriving while others feel emotionally distant or neglected. Meanwhile, Robyn herself reportedly carried emotionally mixed feelings as the tension surrounding the pregnancy became increasingly obvious. According to insiders, she remained genuinely excited about the baby, while also sensing growing emotional discomfort across parts of the family. One insider explained, Robyn reportedly never expected the pregnancy to become emotionally connected to so much unresolved family pain. That reportedly affected her emotionally too, because according to sources, she often felt unfairly blamed for larger family dynamics she did not believe she alone created. At the same time, however, insiders claim she understood why some relatives emotionally associated the pregnancy with shifting priorities and growing imbalance inside the family, especially because Kody's emotional focus around her household had become increasingly visible over time. Meanwhile, Kody reportedly continued struggling to fully understand why the pregnancy created such emotionally complicated reactions for some family members. According to insiders, he largely viewed the situation as positive family news that should have united everyone emotionally. But sources claim many relatives emotionally processed the pregnancy through years of accumulated hurt, disappointment, and perceived favoritism instead. One insider reportedly explained, Kody saw celebration, other people saw confirmation of emotional changes they had feared for years. That disconnect reportedly became one of the defining emotional fractures inside the Brown family afterward. Because according to insiders, the pregnancy reveal ultimately forced many relatives to confront difficult questions they could no longer emotionally avoid. Questions like, was the family still emotionally equal? Had one relationship become emotionally dominant? Could plural marriage survive without emotional balance? And were some family members emotionally giving far more than they received? Those questions reportedly changed the emotional future of the Brown family permanently. Meanwhile, fans watching Sister Wives continued debating the situation online long after the pregnancy storyline unfolded publicly. Some viewers believe the reveal simply exposed natural changes that happen in long-term relationships over time. Others argue the situation revealed deeper emotional flaws inside the plural marriage structure itself. And according to insiders, many family members privately understood why viewers reacted so strongly emotionally, because the pregnancy became about much more than a baby announcement. It became about emotional security, emotional visibility, emotional equality, and emotional survival inside the Brown family. And according to sources close to the family, once those emotional realities surfaced openly, the Brown family reportedly never emotionally functioned the same way again afterward. For some relatives, the pregnancy became the beginning of deeper honesty. For others, it marked the start of emotional distance that would continue growing in future years. But according to insiders, nearly everyone inside the family recognized one thing after Robyn's reveal. The emotional foundation holding the Brown family together had already started changing long before anyone publicly admitted it.
As Robyn Brown's pregnancy continued, becoming a major focus inside the Brown family, insiders say the emotional pressure surrounding the situation quietly intensified in ways viewers of Sister Wives could only partially see on camera. Because, according to people close to the family, the pregnancy itself was never really the true source of tension. Instead, insiders claim it became a mirror reflecting emotional issues that had already existed inside the family for years. And once those emotional differences became impossible to ignore, several relationships reportedly started changing permanently, especially between Kody Brown and some of the older children. According to insiders, several adult family members quietly struggled watching how emotionally present and attentive Kody appeared throughout Robyn's pregnancy. Not because they believed he should care less about the baby, but because sources say some relatives felt they had rarely experienced that same level of emotional consistency themselves over the years. One insider reportedly explained, the pregnancy highlighted emotional differences people had been trying not to think about. That emotional comparison reportedly became increasingly painful privately, because according to insiders, several adult children already felt emotionally distant from Kody before the pregnancy announcement happened.
some reportedly believed family relationships had gradually become more centered around Robyn's household over time. Others allegedly felt emotional communication had weakened significantly compared to earlier years of the family. And according to sources, watching Kody become intensely emotionally invested in Robyn's pregnancy amplified those feelings even further. Meanwhile, Kody Brown reportedly experienced some of the deepest emotional conflict during this period. According to insiders, Kody genuinely wanted to support the family and celebrate positive moments, but sources claim she increasingly struggled emotionally with the growing imbalance she believed existed inside the relationships. One insider explained, Kody reportedly felt like she was watching emotional priorities shift right in front of her. That realization reportedly affected her more deeply than many people realized publicly at the time. Because according to insiders, Kody spent years trying to convince herself that emotional inequality inside plural marriage could still feel manageable if everyone continued making effort. Now, however, sources claim Robyn's pregnancy forced her to confront how emotionally disconnected she already felt from Kody long before the reveal. Especially because insiders say Kody's emotional energy during the pregnancy appeared dramatically different from how he engaged in certain other relationships during that same period. That contrast reportedly became difficult for Kody to emotionally ignore anymore. Meanwhile, fans watching the show began debating online more intensely than ever before. Many viewers openly questioned whether emotional favoritism had become obvious inside the Brown family dynamic. Some fans argued Kody naturally appeared more emotionally connected to Robyn simply because their relationship was healthier at that stage of life. Others believed the pregnancy exposed long-standing emotional imbalances that had quietly existed for years. And according to insiders, family members reportedly became aware of many of those public conversations too. One source explained, it became harder pretending people weren't noticing the emotional differences anymore. That reportedly created additional tension privately, because once emotional dynamics become publicly discussed, insiders say family members often begin reevaluating their own experiences more honestly too. Meanwhile, Meri Brown reportedly continued facing emotionally complicated reactions surrounding the pregnancy. According to insiders, Meri genuinely cared about Robyn and wanted happiness for her. At the same time, however, sources claim the situation reopened unresolved emotional grief connected to infertility, shifting family relationships, and growing emotional distance within her own marriage. One insider reportedly explained, Meri was carrying emotional pain from multiple directions at once. That emotional complexity reportedly became exhausting privately, because according to insiders, she often felt pressure maintaining emotional support outwardly, while internally struggling with sadness and emotional isolation herself. Meanwhile, Janelle Brown reportedly focused heavily on trying to maintain emotional stability for the broader family. According to sources, Janelle recognized earlier than most that the tension surrounding Robyn's pregnancy was not truly about jealousy alone. Instead, insiders say she understood the deeper issue involved emotional trust and perceived fairness inside family relationships overall. One insider explained, when people feel emotionally secure, celebrations usually bring people together. When people already feel emotionally neglected, celebrations can expose those wounds instead. That reportedly became exactly what happened inside the Brown family. Because according to insiders, Robyn's pregnancy unintentionally forced many relatives to emotionally confront feelings they had spent years quietly suppressing. Feelings involving emotional invisibility, unequal attention, shifting priorities, relationship insecurity, and emotional exhaustion. Meanwhile, Robyn herself reportedly became increasingly emotional as she sensed growing tension around the pregnancy. According to insiders, she initially hoped the baby might create a sense of healing or reconnection inside the family. Instead, sources claim she gradually realized the situation was exposing emotional fractures already deeply rooted underneath the surface. One insider reportedly explained, Robyn reportedly started feeling guilty that something meant to bring happiness was creating emotional pain for other people. That emotional realization reportedly affected her significantly, because according to insiders, Robyn often felt unfairly blamed for emotional dynamics that had been developing across the family long before the pregnancy itself. Still, sources say she also understood why some family members emotionally associated the reveal with larger relationship frustrations, especially because Kody's emotional involvement around her household increasingly became impossible for others not to notice. Meanwhile, Kody reportedly struggled emotionally with the growing criticism and tension developing both publicly and privately. According to insiders, he genuinely viewed the pregnancy as positive family news and reportedly felt confused by why some reactions seemed emotionally restrained or complicated. One insider explained, Kody thought everyone should simply be happy about the baby. He didn't fully understand how much deeper the emotional reactions were. That disconnect reportedly became one of the biggest underlying problems during this chapter of the family story. Because according to insiders, many family members no longer viewed emotional situations individually anymore. Everything now connected to larger patterns they believed had developed over years. Patterns involving favoritism, emotional availability, household priority, communication imbalance, and emotional neglect. And according to sources, Robyn's pregnancy became one of the moments that forced those patterns fully into the open emotionally. Meanwhile, several adult children began privately questioning what the future of the family would even look like moving forward. According to insiders, some relatives increasingly worried the emotional center of the Brown family had shifted permanently towards one household, while other relationships slowly weakened. And sources claim those fears intensified significantly throughout Robyn's pregnancy journey, not because anyone rejected the child, but because the reveal reportedly symbolized a much larger emotional transformation happening inside the family itself. One insider reportedly explained, "The baby announcement became the moment many people realized the family no longer emotionally felt the same as it once did." And according to sources close to the Browns, that realization quietly changed the emotional direction of the family forever.